Hey, cool person listening to this episode of Double DM. How are you doing today? Did you drink enough water? And also, fix your posture. You are listening to episode 76 of Double DM, where we talk about environments for your TTRPG and D&D games, like how they are influential factors in world building, or how they are needed for great encounter design, and also how they influence every single scene you have in your games, and a whole lot more. As always, there will be lots of interesting and easy to implement advice in this episode for you to use. I don't want to keep you any longer, but I have to inform you that next week's episode might not be out on time, depending on how much editing I can get in while I have to study for my math exam. But don't worry, it might just come out on Tuesday instead of Monday. But okay, let the future be the future, and now let's stay in the present and let's chat about making your TTRPGs better. Hello and welcome everyone to episode 76 of Double DM. I am, as always, your host Emil, and I am here today with my host Niels. How are you doing today, Niels? What's the happenings?
Nothing much, really. It's just vacation from work, all good, just vibes. And then the slowly creeping fear of my math exam coming up. But yeah, that's 3 weeks out still, so everything's fine.
Yeah, my math exam is only a week out, so I have that creeping fear all the time. But I can't study today on this Friday we're recording, on the 15th of July, because today is the birthday of a friend, and I am going to that later, which is gonna be just a long TTRPG session, apparently. Yeah. We're gonna have a lot of fun playing TTRPGs for, 8-10 hours.
Hell yeah.
I am excited. We just played yesterday as well with that group, our normal group. And now also Friday. Gonna be fun. No, it's gonna be a lot of fun, I reckon. There's gonna be a lot of stuff happening because let's call it magical convention, because that's what it is. All of the mages have their big convention at the MageCon, exactly. MageCon. We call it MageCon. No, it's this big convention of all mages where everyone that has anything to say really as a mage comes together and
does weird shit as mages.
Presents something, tries to become an archmage, or just convenes with other mages, probably. I don't know. I'm not a magical person, which means that I am, at least in some ways, free at this. In other ways, I'm completely not. But that's besides the point. But at this magical convention, at the magical gathering, my character is not kind of out of place, to say it like that. He has his place there because what he did previously and is still part of this hero group that saved the world. But also he doesn't know magic.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Just walking through, seeing all the weird expositions of all the other mages and thinking to himself, oh, well, my buddy can do that better, but sure, go ahead.
I wouldn't say that. Like, it's not expositions, it's more like a 6-week study group.
Okay, yeah, okay.
It's them having lectures. Someone like, I have found this cool new magic type. Let me explain it to you all.
In complete and utter detail, even if you don't like to hear it. But anyways, here it is.
We know that there is someone sneaking into the convention, which is gonna be very interesting to deal with. We know that one of ours, our mage, wants to become an archmage. So wants to take part in this trial to become one, which is going to be a lot of fun, but that's still a few sessions out probably because this convention is 6 weeks long or something.
Okay, yeah.
And we still have a week until the convention starts to play.
Okay, yeah.
And the trial is at that convention for about a few weeks. We don't know.
Okay. Okay. I can see where MageCon has its fun little things that can happen. Awesome. I want to hear more about MageCon then when it's
it's gonna be a lot of stuff. There's also gonna be a lot of stuff before that happening. Because we got a few tidbits to do, a few tidbits to sink our teeth in, so we don't have really downtime, but rather we have stuff to do before the actual stuff we have to do begins, right?
Yeah, okay.
One of these things is a message my character got that he has that the the emperor of the empire that convention is set at, right? We're in a city that belongs to an empire.
Mm-hmm.
With the Emperor Palace, that he is supposed to meet the Emperor there and tell him about stuff, and I don't know. I honestly don't know what stuff he wants to hear from me exactly. I know that they want to hear what actually happened, because we kind of entangled with them already, and they completed their journey. They had to travel to their father, and I don't know what to do exactly there. But yeah, now they're back in town, and there's this message of big heroes that save the world, probably, that there is, and because I am the guardian of this mountain pass, if I get that correctly. I don't have my character sheet with me right now, so I don't know what's exactly that, because I'm fucking fish brain.
I mean, fair when the exam is coming up that soon to just focus on different things, so.
Having a socially awkward ranger.
Yeah.
Sad noises. No, I as a person look forward to it, obviously, but we will see how that goes.
Yeah, let's hope shit does not hit the fan.
If I get executed, it happens.
Yeah, okay.
Just not gonna mess stuff up. Just gonna tell the truth, how it is, and nothing but the truth. That's gonna be the way I go, even if that is problematic.
Yeah, at least it will be fun for everyone at the table.
Hey, yeah, probably.
Hopefully.
No, it's gonna be fun. I already look forward to it. So yeah, that is what's happening for me. Yeah, and then until the exam, I don't have anything else to do, so it's just 4 days of studying and 1 day of rest, because I wanted to have Sundays still off and do something with my family. So I'm gonna study on Saturday, and then the next 3 days before Thursday, where my exam is. And so how about you?
I have a session coming up tomorrow and on Sunday, one where I'm a player in and one that I DM. And the jamming one is, I'm excited to see where all of this is going, because they just got a letter from the uncle, I think it was, if I remember correctly, of one of the player characters, that he got captured by, or close before he got captured, he wrote the letter, that he may be in trouble with some other kind of vampire clan in somewhere in the Underdark, and now they want to find him, and I'm interested to see how they are going about this, who they will interact with, and what type of information they are looking for to find a place where this letter came from, because they don't know yet. It was hastily scribbled and no perfect description of the way from where they are right now. They have to find their own way.
Okay.
But yeah, let's see where all of this is going. But I have to still think about what type of things they might ask, because I kind of have to prepare for that, to give them the information they need. But yeah, that's my plan for today. Preparing this as you do. But yeah, it will be a fun one, I reckon, because as a whole game event, basically, we're making self-made smoked ribs. We're gonna start today and just have an awesome barbecue and D&D session. This
nice.
Sounds like a good weekend to me.
It is a good weekend. Yeah, my weekend is also starting today, right? TJBG session, then studying, and then having dinner with my family. So also good times. Yeah, looking forward for me is also, I have a session next Sunday, which is also gonna be in relations to our topic for next week's episode. I'm gonna teaser that right here, but that episode is about boss fights and fighting bosses and how to make those memorable, how to make boss fights cool. So yeah, my players are gonna have a boss fight, obviously, and we will see where this goes, because I don't know at what point they're gonna initiate their boss fight. So it could be that they fight the boss in the first 2 hours of the session, and then I have to improvise the next 6 hours, because our sessions are 8 hours long. And then I have to, I don't actually think that this boss fight is going to be the end of this boss. I will say that much. If my players don't do it right, but they have the possibility to end it right here. But this boss is not going to be dumb. They're not going to risk their life before they can reach their goal.
Obviously.
They might flee, which I know some people hate when bosses flee, but also going to play through the realism. This boss wouldn't fight to the death. So why would they stay? They have the ability to flee. They would use it.
Yeah, especially if they're smart enough to assess the situation correctly beforehand, rather than just, oh wait, I'm dying, I maybe should flee.
Yeah.
If they're smart enough to do that beforehand, then why wouldn't they? So all right.
Yeah.
I don't have anything else.
No, I don't as well. Let's jump into episode 76. Hey everyone and welcome to the mid-roll of the show. If you are enjoying the show and content, why not subscribe or follow the show right now on whichever platform you are listening on so you can stay up to date with all episode releases. Then, next you can search us up on social media at DoubleDMPod or click the links in the info box of this episode to find our social media channels and follow us there if you want to stay up to date with all scheduling information and episode announcements. If you follow us on Twitter, you will also get a plethora of social media posts as I spend way too much time on that platform. But hey, I have funny conversations with people like you and post memes, so that's a great thing. And lastly, if you want to help the show out even further, rate and review us on your platform. A quick 5-star rating or a few sentence review really gives us the feedback we need to improve the show and help other people find our show too. And hey, you can also just tell a friend about the fun you had learning with us and get them to listen in too. Also, we want to say that our show has open advertisement slots for you to book. Just head on over to our Twitter or email address doubledmpod@gmail.com to get into contact with us about getting your content shown on our show. Thank you for listening to this mid-roll, and now back to the show.
And with that, welcome back to the episode. Now we are talking about environments. So, Emil, as per usual, what are we talking about when we talk about environment?
Environments are everything around us. Currently, we both are sitting in rooms. So those are our environments. If you're out on the streets, that street is your environment. If you're in the woods, that's your environment, right? Everyone knows what environment is. There's no need to define this, but especially in terms of TTRPGs, it's the general, basically first level of the scene you're describing. Place the scene as set in. And I'm talking about scenes, even though some games don't necessarily have a scenic structure, you can still think about every time something happens as a scene. And when you look around in that scene, whatever you see, that's your environment. If your players are in a building, that's the environment. If your players are in the woods, that's environment. If your players are, I don't know, in the palace, that palace is the environment. And you can specify the ranges of environments for yourself, but basically everything the players can see or somehow otherwise sense that is on that first level of just the playground the scene is set in, that's part of this environment. So if you would just go by one sense, which is the sense of sight, everything your players can see is this environment. But obviously they could also smell something or, I don't know, touch something and feel something. They can hear something. There's a lot of different ways the environment can be felt, but it's always there. It has to be, because otherwise you would just no clip out of reality. And that's why it's kind of the basic first level the scene is getting built on, because without it, there is no scene.
Exactly.
Because you cannot set a scene without an environment.
I mean, even if you play in a white room, that white room is your environment for that.
Yeah.
And otherwise, it's just a void without any description, anything the players can go on, anything you can go on.
Yeah, I think that makes environments interesting to talk about because they are always there. And that's why you always will have to pay attention to them. Sometimes it's the GM having to make a battle map for the combat. The battle map is the best way to visualize the environment your players are in. Remember what we talked about in the last episode. I mean, that's exactly what we talked about. The environment you're in is very important. And if you have a map of that environment, you have a way to visualize it for your players. You can also just describe it, obviously, for Theater of the Mind. So you do not need to have a battle map to have necessarily a good environment, because those things are completely disconnected from each other. It's just that the battle map helps your players have a common basis of that environment.
Yeah, and I think you touched on something there with what makes a good environment. So let's try to dissect that, because you mentioned a good battle map doesn't always mean a good environment. So what does a good environment mean?
That's a hard question. That's a really hard question even, because there is no one right answer. I would say a good environment is an environment that at the same time does not distract from what is actually happening in that environment, but also is felt by those in that environment. As it's always there, if it's not felt, it doesn't mean anything.
Exactly.
For the TTRPG, for the players, or necessarily for the characters, obviously. If they do not feel the environment, it doesn't matter which environment they are in. If you do not make it felt that they're in a street instead of a forest, it doesn't matter to them if they're in the forest or in the streets having the same scene. But oftentimes, obviously, the scene is influenced by the environment. If your players are invited to the royal court, the scene is influenced by the environment, or the environment is more or less forced by the scene you want to have, because you want your players to be in the royal court before the queen or the king.
Exactly.
And they will only see people like the players in their royal court, in their throne room, where they are high on a throne looking down at everyone. And that is where the environment is felt.
Exactly.
Where your players feel kind of small in relation to this character, to this king or queen on the throne. So that is where the environment plays in. Because you said, I want the environment to be the royal throne room. I want my king on the throne. And that means my king is higher than my players. That is how the environment is felt.
Yeah.
In one instance, obviously, but that's the basis of it, right? That's why it has to always be there, and that's why it's always kind of felt, but it doesn't have to be that, let's call it pressuring. It doesn't have to be like needs immediate action or it forces your players to do something. It's just that it's always there.
Yeah, and I think to generally say that is a good environment has impact on something, rather being it the scene itself, the way the characters interact with each other or with the NPCs, or just the descriptor of the scene itself. But a good environment always has some sort of impact. May just be leading to another environment even, but the environment still has the impact of getting you there.
Yeah.
Whatever it may be you want to go to, or wherever, or whatever other impact this environment might have.
I mean, you can see this in world building, kind of. I mean, it's when you build a town or a country, even any form of civilization where people live, it's very important to think about the geography of where these people live.
Oh yeah.
Do they have access to water, right? One of the biggest things, it's important to have water, because without it you die.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why cities settle next to rivers, because rivers are the best source of clean water. That's why it happens. And that's environment. This river is the environment for the city.
Yeah.
Right? Or if the city is in the mountains, that is probably gonna influence how these people interact. They have harsher living conditions than those that live on fields with rivers, because they are not able to grow massive amounts of crops. They probably do not have that much food. Maybe they have to import food, but they might have an abundance of minerals that they could use to pay for these foods. But there's still gonna be a difference also in what kind of people live there. I'm not talking about in the mountains there live more dwarves, because that doesn't matter at all. But in these mountains, there's gonna be a lot more miners, people that are there to mine these minerals. That's why the city is there in the first place, right?
Exactly.
There was a mine and they wanted to mine the minerals in the mountains, so they needed to build the infrastructure to do that. And the only way to do that was to build a small town there that then developed into a larger settlement, because it became imminent that there is a lot more in this mine, that there is also a way to support these people, and suddenly more people start living there. And that's because of the environment, because they are on a mountain with minerals that they can mine. That's the influence of environment on a world building level. Obviously there's a lot more different levels to where this comes. We can talk about combat, we can talk about drama scenes, we can talk about a lot of things, but just in world building you can already see that big ass influence by just talking about a few things like a river and a mine. Boom. Yeah. Those two things are very important for settlements if they're that type of settlement.
Yeah, exactly. For example, another thing on a world building scale where you might put a settlement, or a settlement has evolved from, is maybe sea gates or anything like that. There might have been just a fort, but you need a way to support that structure in any way. So you have farmers, you have builders, you have everything, and then suddenly a city or a town develops. And so there's now a completely new settlement forged by the environment around it because of the strategic need to put a fort at the sea gate, for example.
Yeah.
It's just environment forces or impacts settlement development, or in general infrastructure.
Yeah, that's about it, right? On the world building level, you need to think about this. The environment is hugely important. Obviously, if you're a world builder, you know that you can also build the settlement first and then make the environment fit that settlement that you want there. Obviously, that works as well, right? But these things have to play together. A town that is in the mountains is not gonna be the best place to grow the most amount of crops because they do not have that space. There's a lot of terrain that is just unfarmable, basically. Even if you want a mountain town there, or if you want a town that has not many food crops, you could just say that town is in the mountains, right? You can, but this is always this double implication. These things play together, and that's why it's important to think about environment on a world building level. But there's obviously different levels, right? We talked a bit about the scene, but why is it so important to also think about this on the smaller scenic level?
Because it can have impacts on the characters without even building the world right away. Because if you travel through a desert, for example, you need to prepare in a different way than traveling through a fucking forest.
Yeah.
It just has different challenges. Every environment has its own set of challenges and benefits to travel through or traverse or live in. And this is something the players or the characters not need to know, but need to prepare for. And this is another way environment impacts the game itself or the characters or whatever, right?
Oh yeah, I 100% agree, right? The thing is that if your players are traveling, for example, my players are traveling through an icy tundra right now. And you bet your ass that I made a big point of that they are traveling through an icy wasteland. There is no food here. There's a very few settlements here that are at these strategic locations at specific places because those places allow them to live. These underground fissures of, I don't know, heat, basically, right? There's heat rising from down under the earth to the surface. And there's a few towns in this icy wasteland that have built around these fissures that allow them to use that heat where it's not that cold, where they are able to live because it's not freezing cold all the time.
Yeah.
And then they also have the possibility to grow crops in the near vicinity of these warmer fissures because it allows them to. And my players were traveling through this icy wasteland where there's nothing. I made it very clear to them that this environment is basically sparse as it can get. They might see a single animal in the distance when they're lucky. And that obviously influenced the way my players played their characters, the way the environment, that way the environment worked influenced the way my players played their characters. Yeah. They weren't able to say, we go hunting for food. They were able to try, don't get me wrong. But they knew that their chances were a lot less than when they would have gone in the woods.
Yeah, it is. For example, one game I'm playing is in Icewind Dale, and where it's basically all just dark tundra.
Yeah.
There isn't that much food. There isn't that much heat. And this is made clear in the rules and has impact on the characters even on a rules basis.
Yeah.
You have to pack fucking winter clothes because without it you will freeze to death. It's just a matter of time. And please don't go swimming in your fucking winter clothes. Because if you go swimming in winter clothes in negative degrees of winds, you will fucking freeze to death.
Yeah.
And the same goes for other environments. For example, desert. You have to see, it might not be that difficult to traverse than, for example, a snowy tundra, but you have to pack enough water. And that is something on a logistics scale that you have to think about. If we want to travel 5 days with 5 people through a desert and have no magical means of creating water, how can we get enough water for everyone for the 5 days through the fucking desert? Because water is fucking heavy.
Yeah, those rules. I think that's one of the best ways to make the environment felt. It's through these very, very simple rules. You don't have to make a big hard system on it. But if your players are traveling through any extreme environment, right? There's a lot to distinguish between normal, mediocre, and extreme environments, for example. And I think that distinction is very hard to make, especially in the fantasy sets, because obviously they have different means to traverse these extreme environments or these other environments. And obviously everyone is different and all of that stuff. But when you're traveling through an icy tundra where there is nothing except ice and snow, if you're smart enough, you might be able to harness water out of that snow. But that's not your problem. It's the cold and the food.
Yeah.
So making sure that your players pack enough rations for the travel is the way that environment makes itself felt. Because if they're not, they might hunger. And I think there are rules in the DMG or in the player's handbook or somewhere that outline what happens if you do not get enough rations a day. If you do not eat a ration a day. I think there is some rules that if you go, 3 days plus your con modifier without food, you get exhaustion every day for that. And you cannot heal that until you eat a full ration a day.
Yeah.
So that is how that makes itself felt already. The cold can make itself felt by saying you might not be able to travel as fast, because if you travel faster than the normal pace for this environment, which is maybe slower, like 50% slower than the normal travel speed, you will get exhaustion. Because do you know how it is to fucking hike 3 hours through the fucking snowy tundra out there? Most of us probably don't. And I can tell you that I'm a person, I can hike. I can walk 3 to 4 hours up a mountain and then 3 hours down again. I can do that. I did that as a kid. I do that still when I have the time and I'm on vacation or something. But trust me, if that would be done in snow, in an icy tundra, I would be done after 2 hours.
Yeah, it is just...
And that is not because I hate the cold. That is just because it's cold.
Yeah, or just walking through that deep of snow is just fucking exhausting.
Yeah.
Because it takes so much more energy just to move around. I mean, I think everyone probably has run on a normal street or on a running track.
Yeah. I reckon that everyone has.
Is more or less easy.
Yeah.
More easy for others.
Air resistance is the only thing that's keeping you back.
Exactly. But have you ever run on a beach or on any soft surface where your feet don't have that much grip and just sink in, or just move the ground below you around so you don't have that much push forward? It is way more exhausting because of that.
But that's why obviously sometimes runners, I think, train on the beaches, because it allows them way quicker to get stamina and muscles in their legs to get that. But now try running in the ocean. And I'm not talking about if you're right underwater. I'm talking about if you're like a little bit over knee deep in the water. Do you know how much water you need to push away to fucking move your leg? Because your legs are not made to run underwater, because the resistance of that water is, I don't know the numbers, 1,000 times higher than air?
Yeah.
Something like that?
Something along those lines, yeah. It's just fucking terrifying to see.
Yeah, but water moves. Water is still fluid. Water is able to move. Now try to do that with a solid surface, which is the bank of snow or an ice block. Okay, through an ice block you probably wouldn't be able to move at all, but the movement there is probably influenced by the environment, the food you can take in. The night and day cycles are also part of the environment. Maybe you're at a place where there's only 6 hours of sunlight every day. Suddenly, you're very much fucked as a character that doesn't want to travel at night. For example, the character that doesn't have dark vision. You only have 6 hours of I can see, and after that it's dark. Have fun. Because if you're in an environment that is hostile towards you, and you have to pick out a torch in the dark, well, good luck not being found.
Yeah, and this is something that you have to kind of balance then between as a character to see, okay, it is fucking dark, but I want to see something. So do I light a torch or not? Do I light the beacon for everyone to see?
Yeah.
Because even if it's pitch black and you can't see the hand before your eyes, you will see a blip of light somewhere in the dark for miles.
Especially if it's a flat surface, right?
Exactly.
Light travels fast and far. And that illustrates very well how drastic environment influences can be, because all of these have an impact on the characters, but they show how characters have to deal with what new thoughts characters have to make. We need to pack more rations, we need to pack the right clothing, we need to make sure that we use the night and day cycle, we need to make sure that the natural hazards of this land need to be thought of, right? I don't know, if you're in a swamp, maybe there's some fissures underneath some pockets full of poisonous gas that sometimes get shot up into the air in the swamp or something. And if your players know about that, they might make ways around that. These are all very drastic influences, but I think that there are also very minor influences that are not to be underestimated, not for their influence, because as we said, it's minor, but just for how they can still make the scene you're playing, make the game you're playing more immersive, more real, because it's the little things that we do not notice instantly that make up our normal lives as well, right?
Yeah, we notice when they are missing, but we don't notice them when they are present.
Yeah. For example, one of my favorite parts is when my players are outside traveling, which they do a lot in one of my campaigns. They have very few days in cities, so far at least. They're gonna have a city arc coming up at some point. But I make a big point of them being able to sleep in a bed when they can, having a warm meal. even though they can heat their rations on a fire at night or at the campfire, they can do that. But it doesn't compare to a warm, freshly prepared stew in the tavern.
Oh, yeah.
Or a bed at night. Even though they might long rest outside, the bed is always gonna be better than the bad road that they took with them on the journey. And I make a point of that, telling my players that when they go to sleep in the tavern, I go, and finally, you guys can rest a full night without any watches, just on a mattress. Even though it's not the best of mattresses, it's still a mattress. And that's what counts for you guys right now. Even though my players aren't in the world, they do not have the back pain the characters must have sleeping on forest grounds for 6 days, because if you've ever been camping, you know what that fucking means. But they still sound relieved, because all my players know the feeling of being outside for a longer period of time and then finally being in your bed again.
And I think some other things that relate to that directly would be background chatter. When you sit in a tavern all the time or live in a city and you have the constant chattering of people haggling, people talking to each other or whatever, and just the noises of a city around you. And then travel through a forest. You don't hear anything of that. Only some birds cheeping, some winds blowing, but that's it. And that incentivizes some feelings in your character.
Yeah, it will. Obviously, there's difference in how much the player wants to play those out, but you can still make them felt. And I think for me, these little feelings that either the GM says or the player makes felt themselves at the table are actually what makes the role play the best. It's the little details, right? The player, for example, one of my players coming back to the Arctic tundra they're in right now. They had a scene at a campfire. And I told my players, all of you are fucking cold, even with the campfire in the middle. It's not that you're freezing, but you're cold. Especially those of you that have never been in this sort of environment. And one of the players, who was a city kid all his life as a character, he shivered while he talked, right? And that's the little things. He didn't have to. And it also wasn't that much of an influence on the scene. But he made it felt that his character was, in quotation marks, suffering from this environment. He was dealing with it.
And those little things just elevate the roleplay in general. It is just... or it gives the opportunity for an heightening of some roleplay inter-character talk, because if some other characters notice the influence of the environment on your character, they might want to talk to you about it, or might want to help you with it, or anything like that. It's just a talking point that your characters can use for some character interactions, be it with the environment itself or with the other characters or NPCs or whatever. It's just something they can use. And it's a fun thing to see when your players exactly put on or go on from these little cues, because it's not always something that you put a lot of work in, but you describe the scene, and it just, at least for me, it feels great when some players just pick apart some minor details and do something awesome with it, even though it might not be epic in a classical sense.
Yeah, right. It doesn't have to be this grand thing that they're doing. It's just that this little thing of you describing the environment of the scene they're in, and the player going, oh, okay, it smells kind of like bacon here? Okay, then my character takes the fucking time, even though we were on a kind of time crunch, and goes buy some bacon.
Exactly.
Right? It's such a minor thing. It doesn't matter at all to the story, but the player goes with it, and that elevates, because this character has a love for bacon, whatever, right? So it's an easy and not so great example, but you get the point. I feel that as a GM, one of the best things you can do is describe the environment whenever you can, in little ways. Talk about the time of day. That can be important to your players. That's a good information for them, because it can influence a lot about how they go. If they see that they only have 2 hours left of the day, they might decide, okay, let's settle down already and prepare the camp more, because last night we were attacked. So why not make a better camp this time, right? Or what about, temperatures, winds, weather conditions are very good as well. If your players know the weather of where they are right now, they can make very well-informed decisions based on that. It looks like a storm is coming. Okay, we find shelter. It looks like it's gonna snow. Okay, we find shelter. Or whatever else you can think of, really.
Yeah, and one thing that I always like to use, but sadly not use that often, but I want to use it more often, is describing the smells of places or of the environment itself. Because in humans, the sense of smell is very deeply connected to our sense of memory.
Yeah.
And that translates, obviously, even subconsciously to the players. If you, and your characters, if you describe some specific smell and some sessions later describe a similar or even the same smell, that can immediately ring the alarm bells or something like, oh, wait, I've seen or smelled that before, and just create this atmosphere of reoccurring things, whether it might be good or bad, or both in the same situation or in different situations, because it's not a sense that we usually use in TTRPGs, because it's most of the time reliant on sight or sometimes hearing. But I think the smell part is often overlooked.
It's interesting because I think that senses are very important, like you said, because they are the way we perceive the environment we're in. Without any of our if all of our 5 senses were to suddenly stop, we would be left in a dark void of nothingness.
Exactly.
We couldn't hear anything, we couldn't see anything, we couldn't smell or touch anything, we couldn't taste anything. Yeah, that's why you, as a GM, need to play to all 5 senses, right? But I think that most people have gotten very good at doing exactly that as a dungeon master. Not in the recent years, but because that sort of advice has been around for ages, right? And that's for a reason, because everyone knows sight and hearing are not the only senses people rely on.
Yeah, and I think especially regarding that, what you can do with environments to keep your players on your toes and create interesting situations is when you use the environment to take away one of the senses. Suddenly it's dark. Someone casts darkness or the light goes out or whatever. How do your characters react to that sudden change of senses?
Yeah.
Or you can't feel anything anymore. What do your characters do now? Or you can't hear or whatever. It's just that your characters have to suddenly come up with a solution for a problem that would usually not be that much of a problem if everything would be normal. But now suddenly one thing has changed. And this completely changes how your characters would react or would act in general. Because just the environment, again, influencing the characters with just taking something away from them. You don't always have to add something with the environment in a sense, but you can also take something away.
Yeah.
That's just a fun thing to do sometimes, but don't overdo it.
It's a unique environmental challenge, kind of. It's not necessarily an environmental challenge, but it's a challenge to deal with this environment in a different way than players are used to.
Exactly.
Because the character cannot do the things they wanted to do. The blindness and deafened condition are part of D&D. Blind an archer and watch them despair as they have to move into melee range to even be able to hit something.
Yeah.
Ranged attacks with blindness are just, in my opinion, not possible.
Yeah, exactly. You can't just shoot randomly and hit the thing that you want to hit.
Yeah,
it's just,
you can't.
Yeah,
if you can't hear something suddenly, you have this tunnel vision, because the most bad thing about our eyes that we can only look forward, right? Most herbivores have their eyes to sight. Why? So they can see more of their surroundings, because they are the animals that are the prey for these hunters.
Yeah.
And they need to get away from these hunters. They need to see these hunters quicker. And that's a unique way these animals engage with their environment, right? That's the way the environment is hostile towards them through these predatory animals. So they developed a certain way to deal with that. And this is something you will realize if you put an environmental challenge in front of your players, whatever challenge that may be. They will find a way to work with that and change their playstyle, because at the core of it, TTRPG players are very good at adapting to stuff. And they oftentimes enjoy that process, because it's a puzzle that isn't like a puzzle in a dungeon. It's not the same as that. It's a very interesting, unique challenge for them to rethink their approaches to stuff.
Oh yeah.
If they know they can trust the environment because they're, I don't know, in an illusion castle, your players are going to be a lot more suspicious of everything around them. For good reason, obviously. But that will change massively how the sometimes very curious rogue acts, because he walked to the traps 2 times already. Now he's more careful than that. He knows, what if it happens a 3rd time? I better be careful. And that's how the environment has this very subtle influence on the entire behavior of the ones that inhabit that environment.
Yeah. For example, if you're a city kid, you most definitely will act different when you are in a city than you are acting while you're in the woods, because you know what you need to do or how you need to do things or whatever. But in the woods, you have no fucking idea. And therefore, you have to hold back a bit more and perceive first before you act. And in a city, your home turf, basically, you know what you have to do basically on autopilot. And that's the beauty of home turf. The term, I love it, and I love the concept of it, because it means you know your shit there. No one can tell you otherwise. You know your fucking shit. And that's why I love the layer actions in D&D, because that kind of elevates that feeling.
Yeah.
The enemy knows what his home turf is and knows how to deal with certain things and knows how to deal with certain challenges that arrive in their home turf and can change the environment regarding to that. And I think those are just a beautiful thing to use, just as a personal note.
Yeah, no, I agree very much, especially on that layer actions part. I think that's why they are so fucking cool, because they allow to change the environment. They allow for something to happen in combat in D&D that is not just the normal D&D combat.
Exactly.
Because I would agree that normal D&D combat isn't necessarily the best, but the layer actions make it very fun because they add something, an extra element, an extra layer to that combat.
Yeah.
Because now suddenly the environment actively works against the players. And right, we talked about that in the combat episode. Do more with your environment. Hazards, barriers, I don't know, cover, all of that stuff is very, very fun to deal with for your players, because it allows them to engage with the combat not on a level of I hit the enemy, but on a level of this combat is engaging because suddenly I have to hide behind this rock for the turn, wait my turn, and then attack this enemy because stuff, right?
Yeah.
It has to be very specific for your combat, but using the environment always works to your advantage. And I think we talked about the world building part very, very sparsely, but there's not much to talk about. I think everyone knows kind of that. We talked about a lot of how it influences normal scenes, but now we can also talk about how it influences combat. Where we just said environment is very important in combat because it allows for a lot more to happen. It allows for a lot more things to happen then. And also it in this combat part, it allows to change the combat up for both sides as well, right? Even if it's not a layer action for the white dragon or something. If it's just the white dragon fights the players, maybe even in a disadvantaged situation for both of them. They are fighting on a volcano or whatever, and there are these 3 geysers that shoot up molten lava or whatever, or very hot water or hot air into the sky and create these fog clouds that do fire damage. And these move at random around the map and get shot up every 3 rounds. Suddenly, all parties, the dragon and the party, have to move around these clouds because these clouds are deadly and dangerous and turn the tide of this combat in a very quick way.
Or environment can enable your players to use certain tactics with high ground versus low ground, and denying access to them while still having combat access to the enemy they want, just because of the environment they used or they chose to fight in. Or even if the environment changes, so the whole strategy of the combat changes for both sides again. And even though you have the ability to get or to strategize a bit more, it can still keep both sides on their toes to rethink or reevaluate different things regarding how the environment changes during a battle. Because that's very fun to do, to change the environment during battles, because it just changes up things and keeps it interesting.
We talked about the way environment influences world building, settlements, and groups of people. We talked about how it influences singular characters in a scene. We talked about how it influences combats. There are obviously a little bit more ways, right? Environment can influence basically everything you do. Talking about the environment just a little bit can elevate your game a lot. And sometimes even talking about, right, especially if there is something off about the environment, I advise you to talk about it to your players. I advise you to tell your players that there is something off. To have a little spoiler for Titan's Core. In the first or second episode, my players, after the disaster happened that is going to happen in the first few episodes, settled down and everything was done. I made a point of that the nature is quiet. Birds animals, all kinds of things went missing. They fled and are not coming back yet. And that was an unsettling fact for my players, for the environment to be so quiet, to not hear anything, to basically be robbed of this sense of hearing the environment, because there was nothing to hear. There were not a fucking bird around. There wasn't any single animal in a radius of at least 10 miles of the city they were in.
Yeah, and I think you touched on something there, that environment not only influences characters, the scene, the world building, or combat, but it also influences the players themselves. Because especially if you have an environment that the players know very well themselves, they kind of project these things onto themselves right in the moment, and you invoke certain feelings of that. If you traverse the desert and you describe a desert, you immediately know how it feels to be in a desert or in the snowy mountains or whatever. It just keeps this level of immersion because the players know how the environment feels, so they can transfer that to their characters better and maybe adjust it according to their character's backstory, lifestyle, whatever. And this is another way environment can massively influence the game itself.
Yeah, 100%. We talked about describing the environment at the beginning of the scene. Did that a few times already. But now the question sometimes maybe becomes, how much should I describe? Should I take 5 minutes description of every environment? Obviously not. 1-2 sentences is completely enough. Niels, you're in a lush forest with, it's kind of like autumn already. The leaves are getting browner and browner or more colorful, and some are falling down, and it rained a few days ago, and you're in this forest and you're marching towards the town you wanted to head to. Is all I need to say for Niels to be able to know, okay, it rained a few days ago, I'm in a forest, it's kind of autumn season, probably it's windy, it's kind of lush, it's a little bit cold. It's not cold that I have to wear a coat or anything, but I shouldn't wear just a t-shirt, basically. Maybe a coat is all I need, right? And that is everything from that little description that I just made up on the fly. So if you send your players to a certain location that you want them to spend a lot of time in, just write that environment down. Write down a few bullet points. 3 is completely enough to know what you're going for. And have the sense of understanding that environments obviously change. That is majorly important. You need to know that environments will change over time, always. Be it humans terraforming the earth they are living on, be it influence of a single person doing something major, be it a fight that changes an environment, be it a disaster that changes an entire landscape, a volcano eruption, an earthquake, a tsunami. All of these things are major events that change environment completely, and that are things you can work with, right?
Oh yeah.
If you want to have a town, you have a town, and that town is, I don't know, in a desert and has recently been hit by a sandstorm, and your players enter this desert town and they see that a lot of corn and crops have died down. The markets are empty because there isn't much food to sell right now because it was all destroyed in the sandstorm. People are quiet, probably not even working that much. Some are hurt, and there's this kind of a little bit depressing mood about it because the sandstorm hit this village out of nowhere and it destroyed crops, it injured people and made life miserable here.
Yeah.
And that is very important fact about the environment your players are in. They need to know that the citizens are kind of sad, depressed, because that is going to influence the interactions they have with the citizens and the citizens how they respond. Because if you make your citizens just depressed and sad and kind of angry at your players, and your players do not know why, they are going to ask. And if you do not tell them, it's going to be a mystery to them. All right? So that is information that they kind of need. Environment.
And another thing that just came to my mind is that you don't always need the perfect description for everything, because you can imply certain things. Coming back to the description of the forest that you just gave, I immediately had the certain smell of moist, wet earth after a rainy day in my nose. And I immediately had some kind of chills running down my back because I know the feeling of a autumn forest. Without even telling me that there is wind, that there is the smell, I immediately filled in the gap in my mind. And this, the players will do the same with every scene, because if something is missing, the brain will fill in the blanks. So you just have to describe the basics and some minor details, and the rest is made up by the players in a way that fits the scene.
No, it's completely completely true. I think it's also important that you know that fact. It's important that you use that fact, because make a few sentences description of your environment, and your players, if they want something to be there or imagine something to be that they want to play with, they're going to use it. They're going to tell you, they're going to ask you, and that makes it collaborative. The environment doesn't have to be set in stone. It can change depending on what your players ask you for to better fit the scene you're playing, because, right, we're not here to play the environment. We're here to play the scene in that environment.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that that environment serves a purpose for our scene, not the scene serves a purpose for our environment. That means that some points about the environment have to be set in stone. Like, for example, it's a forest and it's on the east coast of this continent and there's a lot of wind here or whatever. But there's other things that your players might be able to fill in. They're asking, well, I don't know, are these trees, these trees, whatever, right? Has it recently rained here? Sure, why not? Why do you need that? Well, I don't know, my character, blah, 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 right? But that environment serves a purpose, and it serves that purpose best if it's not always set in stone. A few things have to be set in stone as the cornerstones to make everyone get on the same page. But aside from that, it's free game to change the environment to serve the purpose we're going for when playing. At least in my opinion, that's the way I like it.
Yeah, same.
I like it.
Same. I usually see environment as a framework for the scene.
Mm-hmm.
That this is where the scene is more or less confined in without being actually confined.
Mm-hmm.
Because you are playing the scene in the environment. Not that the scene can't influence that and the other way around, but they are kind of closed off by the environment.
Yeah.
Because if you go to another environment, you would change the scene.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, the thing that is kept in by the framework.
Yeah.
And the cornerstones that you just mentioned would be the hard points of the frame, and the rest would be the wires connecting and holding everything together.
Mm-hmm.
They can change, but are still there. They kind of keep it all together without compressing it down too much.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, I 100% agree. It's a framework. It's the first level of the place the scene is set in.
Mm-hmm.
It's what your senses feel about the scene. What basically is at first value when you look at the scene. And then, for example, come people, then come players, and all of that stuff comes after that. But the environment is always there. And that's why it's the first level, and that's why it's also there to serve a purpose for the scene we're playing. Obviously, if you're in the real world, if you want to emulate the real world with the TTRPGs, because maybe you do, then yeah, the environment has to be set, because the environment we're in is set, right? I'm in this room, and I can describe you this room in its entirety, and this is this room. I do not change anything about this room in this instant in the description, because that would just be lying. But in the TTRPG, you're serving, the environment is serving the purpose of helping the scene you want to play. And that's why it's fluid. That's why it's changeable, at least in some parts. So yeah, I think we have made a good overview of environments and using them and playing with them, and why playing with environment is very good for your TTRPG experience and for your players and for your game. So Niels, please send us off for today.
And as per usual, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at DoubleDMPod, or you can visit our website at www.doubledm.com. We also have your Ko-Fi if you would like to check that out. And please, if you enjoy the show, leave a rating on your favorite podcast listening platform of your choice. It really helps the show out. And with that, thank you for listening. Hear you on the next one, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.